Okay, so we're back again. This is supposed to be the first chapter, but like I said, the the video and the manuscript I think will be more important to some of you who have read through the syllabi and maybe a little bit concerned about writing a 25-page paper, which I mean technically you'll have 4 weeks to complete in class. So I mean you're definitely going to have time to do that. But let's talk about the philosophies of science and counseling, and why science matters to counseling. Because, we may be sitting here thinking, well, A, why did I sign up for this class? B, am I ever going to use this? And the answer for the first one, I can't answer that. Only you can. But for the second one, I definitely think that when we talk about counseling and science, I think they're one and the same with each other. And hopefully I can make a case for that today, and you will be more inclined to think of yourselves as scientists. I don't want to say instead of counselors, but I think that it is a characteristic of a proficient counselor is to be a scientist. Because when we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with people who are going to come in with all different sorts of ways of being, reacting to the world, emotions, cognitions, behaviors, and there has to be some sort of grounding in our theory or our understanding of human beings. And this is where our theoretical orientation comes from. Many of you who have had me in class before know that I speak and profess that we can only have one theoretical orientation that we subscribe to, and I know that sounds a little bit crazy. And hopefully I'll be able to kind of clear that up as we go along here. But being a scientist kind of works the same way. We can't just look at the way a tree grows and then just decide that we want to understand how it grows through any type of lens we want. For example, we know that if you plant a seed, you pour water on it, the tree will eventually grow to be a full-size tree. If you subscribe to that notion, then we know that's exactly how that works. If you believe that you put a plant or you put a seed in the ground and then God makes that grow, well, then that's your understanding and that's your theory. If you think that you put a seed in the ground and there's a bunch of goblins that live under the ground and they're the ones that construct the tree from the base to the top underground and push it up there, well, then that's your understanding. That's the way that you know that to work. It's difficult to combine all three of those together into understanding how trees grows or how they grow. And that's kind of what we do with theoretical orientations is they're all so different from one another. You only have to pick one. You should only pick one to help you better understand how psychopathology manifests itself within our clients. But what we get to do then is use the interventions from all of the different theories, from CBT, from Gestalt to existentialism. We get to use any of those theories to help meet our clients where we're at. So anyway, I'll talk more about that as we kind of go through this, and I hope that I don't confuse you in differentiating between counselors and scientists, or maybe I do hope I confuse you and you come to the understanding that counselors are scientists. So let's understand the source of knowledge, because where does knowledge come from? So Pierce, a 19th century American mathematician slash philosopher and logician, stated that there are at least four ways of knowing, and then there's a fifth way, which I want to explore a little bit with you as well. The first way that we know is through tenacity, or the notion that whatever belief one firmly adheres to is the truth. The method of authority, which can be human or superhuman. The method of priori, or the method of intuition. And then the scientific method, which involves empirical testing to establish verifiable facts. We, as counselors, will use a little bit, I think, of all of these. Methods of tenacity, authority, priori, and scientific methods to better understand our clients and where they're coming from. But typically we're going to, when we work on interventions with our clients, we'll be using more of a scientific method with them. There's also a fifth way of knowing, and this is a theory that I'm working on right now, which is that knowledge is learned through one's direct experiences with the world. And I didn't come up with that. David Hume and Locke, the German philosophers, from years back came up with empiricism, in that we have to be able to experience the world through our five senses in order for it to make sense. And we kind of see this now. It's really interesting. And again, for those of you who have had me know how I feel about social media and how I don't engage in social media, and it really, because it's my firm belief that in order to really truly experience something, that you have to engage all five senses at a singular time in order to make those things happen. For example, if I explain to you what it's like to ride a roller coaster, you can't then say, oh, I've ridden a roller coaster, but I've experienced that. You actually have to be on a roller coaster to experience what that's like. Or to experience my wife's cooking. You have to actually taste it to understand my wife's cooking. I can't just tell you how she's given me food poisoning twice, and for you to say, I've experienced Ryan's wife's cooking. So, yeah. And I think that's kind of the phenomena of Facebook and other social media, that we feel like we experience things, but that aren't actually experienced or even true. When given overwhelming complexity of life and the vast amounts of knowledge, most people acquire truths in all different types of ways, but reliance upon one type without any critique or analysis can be dangerous. And this is where I specifically think we are with the Facebook and Snap Jam and all of those different things. And in fact, I saw a picture on there, and I think it's called a meme, of something along the lines of, if it's not on the internet, it didn't happen, or if it's not in a picture, it didn't happen, which is amazing, because really, if we don't experience it through our five senses, did it actually happen? And this is very philosophical, and it goes back to some things that you may have learned in your undergrad. But for example, think about how people view our society. Is our society safe, or is it dangerous? And I think that most people would say that society right now is more on the dangerous than safe side, and some may not, and that's okay. It might have to do with your experience with your five senses. But for example, one thing I always find really interesting when I teach forensic counseling is that a lot of people will claim that sex offending is predominant. It's a really big issue, and it's on the rise. And it's definitely an issue that we need to be concerned about as counselors and practitioners. But actually, the chances of running into a sex offender are slim, and to run into a sexually violent predator, which is a tier 3 status here in Pennsylvania, is marginal at best. I think it was like you have 1 in 100th of a percentage of a chance of running into somebody who is a sexually violent predator. But we're to believe that it happens often, and that they're very, very dangerous people, and they can be very dangerous people. But think about this. It's almost like asking somebody for child abductions. That's another good one. That child abductions are on the rise, and they're actually not. But you may read about it on Facebook, and I guess you can read on Facebook. I don't know, on social media. But I would ask you then to kind of counter that and critique that and analyze that and say to yourself, well, when was the last time you were sitting on your front porch and you watched somebody being abducted? Now, that's not saying that hasn't happened or it won't happen. It could. I mean, anything. A 747 can fall from the sky right in front of us right now. That could happen. But what is the likelihood of it? And so when we start to think about, well, have these things actually happened to me? And how can I verify that they're actually happening more often without having to read a post or an article? And so we want to think about that as scientists, and we want to think about that with our clients as well, because they're going to talk about their experiences that they may or may not have had, and we might have to work with them a little bit on that. So individual biases can develop based on limited information and experiences, and this can become distorted, which can lead to inaccurate conclusions. And the only way that we can actually come to accurate conclusions, again, and it's understanding your understanding of where knowledge comes from, is to either experience it or ask enough questions so that you can figure out what is accurate and what is not. So science is derived from the Latin term meaning knowledge, represents a variety of perspectives, philosophy, religion, art, literature, mythology, and those sources of knowledge that we just spoke about. And its attempt to describe and explain human nature. And I think this is what's so difficult because human nature is just so complex in and of itself. So the most recent description of science, early mid-1900s, describes scientists as objective observers who are both methodical and detached in the use of the scientific method to uncover the truth. Objective observers. And critical thought and objectivity, I think, are the two most difficult skills for one to acquire. We'll talk a little bit more about this in class and what it means to be objective and detached. And that doesn't mean that you can't have your own feelings and thoughts about things. But even as counselors, we have feelings and thoughts, but we need to become removed and attached because we don't want those biases, the countertransference, as we might call it, to dictate what's going to happen within the counseling session. So maintaining a critical attitude of reasoning, critical inquiry, is an essential component of being a scientist, and I would say being a counselor as well. The scientist uses the scientific method or a set of assumptions and standardized rules about collecting and evaluating data in an effort to reduce bias and develop credible ways of knowing. But isn't that counseling? Like, why do we tell you guys about all these different ways of working with your clients or teaching you all these different theoretical orientations? Typically, we teach anywhere from 12 to 16 in a theories class, depending on who the instructor is. But we do this so that as a counselor, or if you just take out counselor and put scientist, you get to choose a scientific method. Again, you can take out scientific method and put theoretical orientation that includes a set of assumptions and standardized rules about collecting and evaluating data from your client. It tells us about how psychopathology is happening within that person. If it's a theory of object relations, then object relations theory is going to tell you it has to do with the attachments. The standard set of assumptions and rules are about the attachments that the child made at a young age, and those attachments become pervasive in their attachments later on in adulthood. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to use object relation interventions with them. You might have a client who is very cognitively aware of things and may like CBT interventions, but the way that you can understand and conceptualize what's happening within the person or the way that you're going to collect the data without having bias is part of that orientation, or as scientists, part of that scientific method. So if you could just use scientific method and theoretical orientation interchangeably, depending on what type of setting you're in, I think then you'll start to see that being a scientist and a counselor are actually very, very similar. So the two basic functions of the scientific approach when we're conducting research is to first advance knowledge, make discoveries, and learn facts. And so here again, if you'd like to challenge me on the counseling piece, isn't that exactly what we do with our clients? Advance knowledge, make discoveries, and learn facts. If you think about the Johari window from your interpersonal class, the Johari window is all about things we know about ourselves and what we know about others and what they know. And so to advance knowledge from the Johari window, that's going to be things that the counselors know that the clients don't know, that pane of the window, right? And we're going to help advance that into the what's known by the counselor and what's known by the client. Make discoveries. That's going to be things that are unknown to the counselor and unknown to the client. And again, once we know those, we move those to the known by both. And then learning facts, and those are the things that are unknown to the counselor, but known to the client, right? And we're going to move that to knowing by both parties. So if you think about from a Johari window perspective, the advancement of knowledge is scientific, and it's what we do as counselors. The second is to establish relations among events and develop theories, thereby helping professionals make predictions of future events. And again, when we're working with our clients, aren't we trying to come up with some type of basis of understanding of what they're doing, so that we can understand how they may react in the future, or how their behaviors might be causing irrational thoughts, cognitive distortions, whatever the theory that you're working within tells you is happening psychopathologically, happens because we're trying to be predictors of these future events. Not that we're going to tell our clients this is what's going to happen, but so that we have an understanding of what is going on with their clients. So, philosophical foundations guides one understanding of the world and affect the methods by which scientists conduct research. Or theoretical orientation guide counselors' understanding of their clients and affects the methods by which the counselors conduct counseling. I don't know. I find it funny that these words are just completely interchangeable with one another. And again, if you don't agree with me, please you can have a conversation. We can have a friendly philosophical debate about this, and I won't be ever offended if you tell me that all of this that I'm speaking is bullshit. But I think that it's pretty accurate. So let's keep going. All right, so here are some different types of ways, some different theoretical orientations or scientific approaches of scientists. And first is positivism. It's the paradigm that most closely depicts the scientific method as is traditionally taught in physical sciences. So this is going to be, we're going to make a hypothesis, there's a truth about it, and that we can figure it out, and that we have some kind of methodology that's going to illuminate the truth, and it's going to tell us whether something is or is not happening. It's very, very good for the hard sciences. Counseling psychology is sometimes known as a soft science because there's a human component intertwined with it. But positivism is the way that we find out these truths, and we remain fairly objective throughout this piece. So there's well-defined steps within this. The scientist makes a conjecture about the nature of a universe, or the nature of a paradigm, or the nature of a phenomenon, or a human being, whatever it might be. And then the scientist will design an experiment so that we can either confirm or disconfirm this conjecture or this thought, or sometimes this hypothesis, so that we can see if it is true or not. Again, a little bit more difficult with human beings, but in nature we could definitely set up experiments to see if things happen. There are important characteristics of this type of research. First, the relations are typically expressed in forms of causality, meaning X causes Y, which again is easy. If I throw a rock out of a window, gravity causes the rock to fall to the ground. We're pretty sure about that. We don't. I mean, some of us may believe that there's some kind of magical force that's involved with that. But I would say the vast majority of people would say that it is gravity that is causing the rock to fall to the ground. And so what we do is, instead of trying to think about all the different things that play into the rock falling to the ground, we take more of a reductionistic standpoint, and we take this really complex process and break it down into sub-processes, which can be studied more easily. So the theory of gravity could be studied way more easily than understanding the physics behind the measuring trajectory of launching a rock out the window, with the effects of humidity, temperature, wind speed at the ground, wind speed 3 stories up, and all of these different factors that complicate throwing the speed or the velocity of a rock hitting the ground, which we all know, if given enough space, will reach a finite speed where it will no longer go any faster, called terminal velocity. But how long does it take for it to get to terminal velocity? Anyway, these are all things that we could figure out with positivism, but what we have to do is we have to break it down to its most simplest processes first. And then third, laws are usually expressed mathematically, and so that what I was just explaining right there had tons of mathematics involved with it. And so typically what we can do from a positivist standpoint is we can apply statistics to better understand human nature, or certain characteristics of human nature. So looking at the micro, not the macro, where sometimes when we do qualitative work, we're doing quite the opposite of that, and we don't use any type of mathematical measurements. Post-positivism, so this is after the positivist movement, and this is the belief that a real reality and a goal of discovering the truth are similar, but post-positivists recognize that truth cannot be fully known, and at best, researchers make probabilistic statements rather than absolute statements about the truth. And so this is where the human aspect will come in, because we know that, throwing a rock out the window will cause the rock to hit the ground. But when we start talking about humans are not that predictable. And that truths become realities of the individual who are living that reality itself. So this leads to some problem areas. And so with that, we don't make the causality statements where X equals Y or X is causing Y, we'll typically use corroborated to indicate a study procedure that results in consistent prediction. So if we were doing something post-positivist and we had two studies, we would say that the studies corroborate each other to show that there is a relation, and we wouldn't use a term like proved or anything like that. And a succession of studies that fail to confirm or to predict would constitute evidence that the theory should be revised or that it should be abandoned. And so it allows us to do kind of that revisionary process where, as the positivism standpoint would say that it's something with the law, or maybe it's something with our own mathematics that could be incorrect. And then there's constructivism, where the notion of truth and reality are abandoned in favor of the belief that ideas about the world, particularly the social world, are constructed in the minds of individuals. So if you've had my classes before, you know that I am a postmodern constructivist, meaning that this is how I view my clients. But as a scientist, this isn't how I operate, which is kind of interesting. I'm now learning that insight as I'm speaking this. So constructivists recognize that these constructions are based on the experience of the individual as they interact with the physical and the social environment, and they're shaped by cultural context and may be idiosyncratic to the individual. We also believe that the meaning attributed to an event by a participant of the system is attributed to the event of the participant of the system rather than the event itself. So it's not the fact that planes crashed into the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11. It's the meaning that is attributed to that by the individual. And so the last class, I think the addictions class I just had this summer, we talked about this a little bit. So we can think about 9/11 and what that was like. The meaning for each one of us will be completely different. Some people, I think, in the class may have been in kindergarten or they were very young at that point. I don't think anybody wasn't born. No, they had to have been born. But there were other people that were not connected to that. Myself, I lived in North Jersey, lived in Jersey, grew up in North Jersey, and worked not too far from the buildings. And remember that day vividly, very vividly, because I was 21 years old when that happened. Yeah. So, so my lived experience may have been a lot different than people who lived in Oklahoma during the time. So anyway, the constructivist believes that we attribute our own meanings to the events that we experience. And then constructivists use hermeneutics and dialects to facilitate understanding of the participant's construction. And so, meaning like the language, the behavior, text, artifacts, other aspects of human behavior or thought that help to interpret the data that are provided or the experiences that they're experiencing. So constructivists use these data to help develop an interpretation that is a description of the construct of the participants. And we see this a lot with when we're dealing with qualitative type studies. The constructivists will also attend to the dialectics or the interactions between the participants and the investigator in the interpretation of the data as well. We'll get into more of the qualitative and quantitative research methodological definitions later on, so I'm not going to get too crazy into the constructivistic side. But in this paradigm, there could be no conjectures, no predictions based on hypothesized truths or tests of conjectures, because each person and each individual is going to be completely different from the next. So data are not collected with the aim of determining whether or not observations are consistent with the conjecture. We're just really interested in the data by themselves. We also have critical theory, and this posits that people's social constructions are shaped by the social, political, cultural, historical, and economic forces of the environment that are created by individuals who are in a position of power. And so this may be known as theories of oppression. In other words, the goal of critical theory is to facilitate individuals' realization that constructions are socially constructed beliefs rather than unchangeable truths. Again, think about that from a counseling standpoint, right? Through this process, the dialectic leads individuals to understand that social action is needed to change The social order is to facilitate emancipation from oppression, like racism, classism, heterosexism, sexism, ageism, different isms. So these scientific methods as applied to counseling. So within the field of counseling, the goal of the scientific method is multifaceted. It's to advance knowledge, it's to make discoveries, it's to increase one's understanding of human behavior, and is used to solve practical problems. One of the things we're going to talk about is the use of quantitative versus qualitative research, and that specifically in the counseling field, we overwhelmingly use qualitative research to try to better explain uh, all of these advancements of knowledge, which we're going to talk about some of the major limitations of qualitative. I think qualitative is very attractive to counselors because it looks a lot like counseling. It looks very, very similar to counseling. So it comes almost second nature to us. But the problem with qualitative is that it's used to explain a very interesting or well-defined phenomenon with a small group of people, and it's not meant to be translated to the greater population. But as counselors, I don't know why we do it, but we do the opposite. We will study 3 or 4 people, and oftentimes because the scientist who is studying the 3 or 4 people have the same lived experience of these people and feel like it's information that needs to be given out to everybody else. So you will often see, especially in counseling literature from counseling doctoral students, is the lived experience of mothers in doctoral programs. You will see this time and time and time again. And the researchers will come up with this data, and they will present this data as if it's, as if it's something that everybody needs to take into consideration when they have students in their classes who are mothers. And it's good to know about those individual students and what their needs were, but that doesn't translate well to everybody because, as some people in class may or may not know, some women are mothers and some aren't mothers, and some of the mothers have really strong support systems that are able to help take care of the kids when mom is at class, and some don't have that, and moms have to be more resourceful. And then there's men in class, and there's men with children. There's all these different variables, and so as counselors, what we should be doing is being involved in more multicultural research. When I say multicultural, I mean multi as many cultural instead of this phenomena of being myopically culture, singular culture, uniculture research that we're doing, so that we can advance knowledge, so that we can understand human behavior, not one specific group's behavior, and use all this knowledge to solve practical problems together, if that makes sense. So, I think that second statement there kind of describes that as well. The expansion of knowledge in the counseling profession is guided by pressing societal needs as well as questions or problems that arise in one's professional work. Again, too often I think that we're looking at doctoral students' lived experiences of whatever. We don't do a lot of research that's clinical, saying what's happening with our clients. What interventions can be used to help mitigate the symptomology of X, Y, and Z. So these are all areas that we can kind of move in the future. I apologize, I'm kind of being tangential here. A common defining element of the counseling profession is the conceptualizations of a person's behavior as a function of the environment. It is more ecosystemic than anything, whereas psychologists often conceptualize a person's behavior as a dysfunction of the self. Again, kind of that medical model versus the holistic model. And so this functioning in the environment is more holistic, and the person as a whole, rather than the person being sick and trying to chase symptomology. A goal of science, therefore, is to extend one's knowledge about interactions between individuals and a larger personal, social, cultural, and historical context. So theories seek to establish general relations and conditional statements among events that help professionals to understand phenomena. Theories are relevant to science in that they provide a mechanism by which to organize and understand explanations for the dynamics that underlie a given psychological phenomenon. So this is why it's so important for us to understand theory when we're working with our clients, because our theories are the only things that ground us when we get lost. They're the only things that tell us what's going on with our clients. We can't just use our intuition or our hunches or our own beliefs of why a client is acting the way they are. We have to use our theories, because our theories are empirically tested or scientifically tested to be valid and reliable. Okay, so another critical role of theory in science is that theories provide a foundation for hypothesis development and testing, which is what we do with our clients. We have a hypothesis of why they're being, acting, feeling, thinking the way that they are, and then testing what things will help make changes in their life or help them reach the goals that they want to reach. And these theoretical frameworks consist of a set of conditional statements that can be qualified by specific information about the individual, allowing both the needed specificity and complexity in explaining and predicting the individual's behavior. So that's a lot of words about what we do, but it's pretty straightforward. Yeah. So interesting. So in their review of the literature from 3 major counseling journals from 1990 to 1999, I know, and some of you are probably like, oh, it's forever ago. For me, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that time. Carr and Larson demonstrated that less than half of the sampled empirical quantitative studies published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, the Journal of Career Development, and the Journal of Vocational Behavior met the criteria for consideration as theory-derived research. Less than half. So then what are we doing research on if it's not theory-driven? So theory-driven research also allows counseling professionals to ensure they are engaging in interventions with individuals that are theory-driven and therefore are empirically tested. And this is my problem with the whole integrative thing, because if you start using a little bit of this and a little that and this and that, and then you get this thing, it's like, okay, great. Where is that tested? It's not. They're all tested on their own, but I haven't seen any type of journal saying that the use of DBT, CBT, object relations, Gestalt, and existential will help a person recover from the symptoms of PTSD faster than CBT alone. I don't see that, but for some reason, counselors like to go along and just say, oh, I have an integrative approach. And to me, that sounds rather unethical because it's not, sorry, I'm putting my shoes back on, because it's not theory-driven or it's not empirically based. Okay, so there's a suggestion that counselors incorporate a scientific or critical thinking model within their practice by generating hypotheses based on the data that the client presents, which is followed up by empirical testing of hypotheses to develop a model that could be used to make predictions about the client. Because if you can make predictions about our client, we could teach our clients to make predictions about themselves and how they may act. So the essence of this approach is that it's data-based or empirical, which lessens the chance of personal biases or subjectivity, because subjectivity is what we want to take out of the counseling session. We want to insert objectivity of our theory. And researchers must rely upon sound research methods to build the knowledge. Researchers must rely upon sound research methods to build the knowledge upon which the counseling profession is based. I'm going to have to work on rewriting that. So the integration of science and practice is the foundation of graduate training programs, although we don't really speak that way. Some professors may speak that way. And I have my own theories about that, but some may not. So we have to realize that this really is, science and practice are the foundations of what we do. The basic assumption is that students trained in both science and practice will be better prepared as professionals regardless of where their particular job falls on the science versus practice continuum. And for psychologists, we see there's a difference in the doctoral side of the PhD versus the PsyD, where the PsyD is more clinician scientist or practitioner scientist, and the PhD is more scientist practitioner. For counseling graduate students, we try to infuse as much as possible because they're both beneficial. So scientific or critical thinking is a central outcome for graduate training. And I challenge students quite often to begin, if they haven't been, to begin thinking critically or objectively about things, because I think that once you can think objectively, that's when you can start to be empathic. I think that it's difficult for somebody to be empathic for somebody else when they don't have the ability to think critically about the situation that they're in, and it's very evident when we have students who are not able to think critically, because then it becomes very subjective to them and the reason why they're dealing with this, and they have answers. And when I hear answers, that's telling me that we're not really thinking critically. We're just trying to solve problems, and we're not empathizing or putting ourselves in the shoes of the client. The most important outcome is whether the graduate can utilize scientific or critical thinking in all professional activities rather than the actual level of engagement in science or practice activities. So scientific thinking refers to a controlled method of inquiry and reasoning, typically to collect data of some kind for the purpose of testing a hypothesis. These are all things that we do with our clients. Again, I don't know if it's phrased this way in our skills and theories classes. And a crucial characteristic of a professional counselor is the integration of scientific thinking into daily activities and the professional practice. Scientific thinking is instrumental in how counselors process information about a specific client during counseling, as well as evaluating the counseling process in and of itself. And one of the hallmarks of graduate work in counseling is the acquisition of these critical thinking skills, the ability to identify and process information with fewer biases, stereotypes, and assumptions, formulate hypotheses, gather data, and make informed decisions about where you're going to go and what you're going to do next with your clients. Research clearly indicates that people are selective or biased in their, looks like, okay. My wife just texted us. Sorry about that. So research clearly indicates that people are selective or biased in types of information for which they attend to, and do not think as objective computers. And I'm not asking you guys that they could be objective computers, but just to be objective humans, which I think is difficult. And becoming an active consumer of professional research literature is a basic expectation of graduate training, and you guys are getting a more advanced training in this. And reading the literature affects one's thinking, refines conceptualizations of the counseling process, and informs the treatments and the interventions that you will use with your clients. And that's all I got for you guys with this one. So this is going to be kind of the underpinning of our class over the next 4 weeks, is trying to understand the philosophies of science and counseling. And what's going to be really interesting is that our class is going to be fairly dichotomous in that I'm going to be doing the lectures online like this and speaking about some of the theories, especially when we start getting into applied research. And then in class, we're going to be focusing on strictly applied research. So what I would like you to do, and I said it in the last video, and I ask you to please do this, please, as you watch these videos, write down questions that you may have and bring them to class. And we'll start every class with, what questions do you have about the videos? Because I'll probably put 4 videos up a week. So I'll put 2 videos up before the Monday class, 2 videos up before the Wednesday class, so that we'll be kind of right on track with where we need to go. And then anything we need to discuss in class, any clarification, especially when it comes to the practice of counseling, I would love to be able to answer those things for you. So, okay, so that's that. I hope all is well, and I will be seeing you guys soon. Thanks.